Welcome. I'm Ed, the antiquarian. As a lad studying Greek and Roman history and later at university, I was exposed to sculptures and buildings composed of white marble. Just like the Erechtheion you see behind me on the top of the Acropolis in Athens. And that fashioned my classical aesthetic. When I think of classical civilization, I picture buildings and statues of pure white marble. Well, like most everything else in the 21st century, that's changing. Now we're being told that ancient classical sculptures and buildings were colorized. Now, for traditionalists like myself, they're clinging to the idea that in order to appreciate the form, the artistry of the sculptor, one must see them in the nude, if you will, without color, so that you can see the fine work of the sculptor's chisel. And this gallery you see here is in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. And it's pretty much the same at the Metropolitan Museum or the British Museum or the Vatican. They're not rushing to embrace or to colorize their statues that they have on display for the public. The public wouldn't stand for, nor did the Renaissance sculptors. When they saw Roman statues being hauled out of the earth and cleaned up, what they saw were white marble statues, or occasionally bronze statues that were recovered mostly from the sea. But they had no color on them. The color, if there had been any, had simply worn away. And so Michelangelo and Donatello, and these two examples, simply used the basic material, the marble or the bronze, in order to show their artistry. In the 18th century, Johann Winkelmann published his History of Ancient Art. He would be setting the Western aesthetic. Since white is the color that reflects the most rays, a beautiful body will be the more beautiful, the whiter it is. And he chose as his premier example his favorite statue, the Apollo Belvedere, which he believed was a Greek original, but turns out to be a later copy of probably a Hellenistic work. No matter. He set the fashion for the next 2.5 centuries for Western scholars and the general public. No mention of color whatsoever. Now, in the early 19th century, some explorers discovered one of my favorite temples in all of Greece, the Temple of Athena Phaia on the island of Aegina in the Saronic Gulf, not far from Athens. It's been upgraded a little with this platform and such, but it was a wonderful place. I spent many a happy hour there without other people around because it's rather difficult to get to, although now tour buses seem to go there. But at any rate, these explorers discovered some pedimental sculpture still in place here at this end and also at this end, and of course, broken sculptures scattered around. And they liberated these broken sculptures and took them back to Germany, to Munich, to the Glyptothek, where they remain today. Restored, cleaned up. Here they are. This is the west pediment as best it can be displayed. You can see the archer here and here where a man named Brinkman has decided that this is the way this archer must have looked back in the 6th century BC when this temple of Athena Aphaea was completed. It would have had this coloring on the various figures that were displayed on the pediments, both east and west. He based his theories that ancient sculptures were colored on the fact that when Greece became independent in the 1830s, they soon set about cleaning up the Acropolis and restoring it to what as best they could to what it looked like in classical times. And they excavated a whole group of statues that had been damaged or destroyed by the Persians when they sacked Athens in the year 480 BC. And some of these statues, this particular Kore or Persephone, had some obvious coloration on it. Now, does that mean that it looked like this back in the 6th century when these sculptures were executed? One would hope not. The colors are too intense, too saturated. And in truth, this work, the coloration, was put onto plaster casts of the originals. And it could be the white plaster does intensify the coloration. In any event, it's a garish reproduction of what it might have looked like in antiquity and disguises the workmanship of the sculptor. Nevertheless, Vincent Brinkman, who is in charge of this coloration project and has been for some number of years, he started back in the 1990s, finally launched an international show of plaster casts that have been colorized in a manner of which he thought reproduced what they look like in antiquity. It was called Gods in Color, and it even came to San Francisco. But you can see here the difference between the original. You can see clearly the workmanship of the sculptor here. And here it gets lost in all of the color. The color takes over. It overwhelms the workmanship of the sculptor. This is a better example of that. It is a question of form versus decoration or color. That the wavelengths hitting your eyes from the color distort your appreciation of the form. You don't see all of the workmanship that in its detail that you can see. And especially if you take your hands, your fingers, and run it over the statue, although you're not supposed to touch the statues, you'll feel the fine uh, detail that the sculptors put in that you can scarcely see with your naked eye and certainly can't see once it is colorized. This idea, not all art historians are enthusiastic for the idea of strong colorization. Somebody like Fabio Berri from Stanford University, an art historian there, believes that the Greek aesthetic itself would have demanded more subtle coloring to the statues if indeed they did use coloring. And tongue in cheek, he said about this attempt to colorize a famous statue of Caesar Augustus. He says the colorized Augustus looks like a cross-dresser trying to hail a taxi. It's his way of saying they have simply overdone the idea that the statues would have looked quite this garish in antiquity. Perhaps he's right, perhaps not. So to return to the Erechtheion, are we to imagine that somehow restorers will get their hands on the entire Acropolis and will paint the Parthenon, the Erechtheion, all of the sculptures that are in the original sculptures that are in the Acropolis Museum, and that future generations will develop a new colorized aesthetic for what constitutes classical civilization. As for we traditionalists, I'm afraid that our time is running out. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Think about this and what your reaction is to color, form versus color. And please return to this channel every now and then to see what new videos have been put up for your lifelong learning experience. Thanks again.